In 2026, the average full-time worker in the United States earns approximately $59,000 per year before taxes. On the surface, that number sounds livable. It sounds like enough. But when you factor in federal income tax, state tax, Social Security contributions, Medicare deductions, and health insurance premiums, the actual take-home figure drops closer to $42,000 annually, or roughly $3,500 per month. Now subtract the average American's monthly rent, which according to the most recent national housing data sits at just over $1,700. Subtract the average monthly grocery bill of over $500. Subtract transportation costs, utilities, phone, internet, and the minimum payments on the average household's credit card debt, which, as of early 2026, has crossed $14,000 per household for the first time in recorded history. When you run those numbers, the average full-time employed American is left with somewhere between $200 and $400 of discretionary income per month. Not savings, discretionary income. The money left after every essential obligation has been met. That is not financial stability. That is financial survival. And the troubling reality is that for tens of millions of workers across the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, the difference between those two things has never been more stark or more consequential. This is Hustle Stack, and in this video, we're going to do something that most personal finance content refuses to do. We are going to follow the data. Not the motivational narrative, not the feel-good story about the overnight success. The actual, documented, measurable evidence of what a single income from traditional employment does to a person's financial trajectory in 2026, and why the structural forces driving that outcome are not temporary, not cyclical, and not going to reverse on their own. Let's start with inflation, because no honest conversation about employment and income can avoid it. Between 2020 and 2026, cumulative inflation across the G7 economies averaged approximately 23%. That means a basket of goods and services that cost $1,000 in 2020 costs roughly $1,230 today. For most consumer categories, food, housing, energy, healthcare, and education, the real increases have been steeper than that average suggests. Grocery prices in the United States are up over 30% from their 2020 baseline. Rental prices in major metropolitan areas across the UK have increased by an average of 28% over the same period. Energy costs in Canada and Australia have seen comparable or greater increases depending on region and energy source. Now compare those figures to wage growth over the same period. According to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, average hourly earnings in the United States grew by approximately 17% between 2020 and 2026. In the United Kingdom, the Office for National Statistics reports average wage growth of roughly 15% over the same time frame. The arithmetic here is unavoidable. Prices went up by 23% or more. Wages went up by 15 to 17%. The gap between those two numbers is not a rounding error. It is a structural decline in real purchasing power. A quiet, statistically documented reduction in what an hour of work actually buys. What this means in practical terms is that the 9-to-5 worker of 2026 is working the same hours, in many cases performing the same tasks, as their counterpart from 6 years ago, and affording measurably less with the result. The treadmill is moving faster than the worker on it. And the most alarming finding in recent labor economics research is not that this gap exists, but that it has been widening, not narrowing, for the past 4 consecutive years. But inflation is only one layer of the problem. The second layer is taxation. Specifically, the way that employment income is taxed relative to every other form of income available in a modern economy. In the United States, employment income, the kind earned by showing up to a job and getting a paycheck, is taxed at ordinary income rates, which range from 10 to 37% depending on the bracket. Capital gains from investments held for more than 1 year are taxed at rates between 0 and 20%, significantly lower for most earners. Qualified dividends are taxed at the same preferential rates as long-term capital gains. Income from certain business structures can be routed through entities that provide additional deductions and deferrals unavailable to standard employees. The result is a tax code that systematically advantages people who earn money from assets and businesses over people who earn money from their labor. This is not a political observation. It is a structural one. The tax architecture of every major Western economy was designed, over decades of legislative decisions, to encourage capital investment and business formation. Whether that policy goal is sound or not is a separate debate. The operational reality for an individual worker is that the income generated by their employment is taxed more heavily at the source before they can deploy it into wealth-building activities than almost any other form of income available. A person earning $60,000 in wages pays a higher effective tax rate on that income than a person earning $60,000 in long-term capital gains. That disparity is measurable, documented, and consequential. The third structural force working against the traditional employee in 2026 is one that has been discussed extensively but not yet fully absorbed in terms of its real economic implications: the accelerating integration of artificial intelligence into the workforce. According to research published by the McKinsey Global Institute in 2025, approximately 30% of current work activities across the global economy are technically automatable using AI and robotics technologies that already exist. More importantly, the research found that the tasks most susceptible to automation are not primarily low-skill, low-wage positions. The categories with the highest automation potential include data collection and processing, routine customer interaction, basic analysis and reporting, and standardized content production, tasks that currently form the backbone of white-collar employment across finance, insurance, legal services, healthcare administration, and corporate management. The implications of this for employment security are not speculative. They are already visible in layoff data. Technology sector employment in the U.S. declined by over 200,000 jobs in 2024 and 2025 combined, with a significant portion of those reductions directly attributed to AI-driven workflow efficiencies. Financial services firms across the UK reduced operational headcount by an estimated 40,000 positions over the same period. Customer service departments at major corporations globally have seen workforce reductions of between 20 and 40% as AI-assisted tools have taken over first- and second-tier inquiry resolution. The jobs being eliminated are not all entry-level. Many of them are mid-career, mid-salary positions held by people who did everything the traditional employment path asked of them: went to university, built skills, earned promotions, accumulated experience, and still found themselves structurally displaced by a technology their employer had every financial incentive to adopt. The fourth force is housing, and it deserves particular attention because home ownership has historically been the primary mechanism through which middle-income workers built intergenerational wealth. In the United States, the median home price in 2026 sits at approximately $420,000, an increase of over 60% from the 2019 median. Average mortgage rates, while lower than their 2023 peak, remain above 6% as of early 2026. The monthly payment on a median-priced home purchased today, with a standard 20% down payment, is approximately $2,000, consuming over half of the average full-time worker's take-home pay before any other expense is considered. The situation in the United Kingdom is comparably challenging. Average house prices in England now exceed £310,000, with London and the South East significantly higher. The average first-time buyer in England is now 33 years old, the oldest in recorded history, and the deposit required to enter the market in most cities represents between 4 and 7 years of savings for someone earning the average wage, assuming they save aggressively and encounter no financial emergencies during that period. In Canada, average home prices in major urban centers, including Toronto and Vancouver, remain among the highest relative to median income of any city in the developed world. What this means is that the traditional path to middle-class wealth accumulation, earn a stable salary, save a deposit, buy a home, build equity over time, has become practically inaccessible for a growing segment of the population. The latter hasn't disappeared, it has been pulled several rungs higher. And for people whose income depends entirely on employment wages that are not keeping pace with housing prices, the prospect of homeownership as a wealth-building strategy is receding, not approaching. Now, if you have been tracking these four forces, wage growth falling behind inflation, the structural tax disadvantage of employment income, AI-driven displacement of mid-career roles, and the collapse of housing accessibility for average earners, a reasonable question emerges. What is the actual financial trajectory for someone who relies entirely on a single 9-to-5 income throughout their working life in 2026? The Social Security Administration's own actuarial data is instructive here. The median Social Security benefit for a retired worker in the United States in 2026 is approximately $18,400 annually, just over $1,500 per month. The average retirement savings balance for Americans between the ages of 55 and 64, according to Federal Reserve data, is approximately $134,000. Assuming a conservative 4% annual withdrawal rate, that balance generates approximately $5,360 per year in additional income. Combined with the median Social Security benefit, the average American nearing retirement age has a projected annual income in retirement of approximately $23,700. The federal poverty line for an individual in 2026 sits at approximately $15,000. The average retiree is surviving on less than $9,000 above the poverty threshold. These are not edge cases or worst-case scenarios. These are median outcomes. Median, the middle of the distribution. The person who did everything the traditional employment path told them to do, worked consistently, contributed to their retirement account, paid their taxes, followed the rules, and arrived at retirement age with an income just marginally above the poverty line. The picture in the United Kingdom and Canada, while structured differently, tells a comparable story. Average UK pension income for a full career of national insurance contributions, combined with a modest private pension, leaves the typical retiree with an income that the Joseph Rowntree Foundation describes as adequate for basic living, but insufficient for what it calls a moderate retirement standard, meaning holidays, social activities, home maintenance, and the ability to absorb unexpected costs without stress. For the majority of British retirees, that moderate standard is not being met. So what does all of this mean for someone who is currently employed, currently relying on a single income, and currently trying to make decisions about their financial future? It means that the structure of traditional employment, as it exists in 2026, is not a wealth-building mechanism. It is a survival mechanism. It provides enough, in most cases, to meet immediate obligations and maintain a standard of living, but not enough, by the data, to build the kind of financial resilience, asset base, or retirement security that most people understand, in the abstract, that they need. The response to this structural reality is not panic, and it is not the abandonment of employment entirely. For most people, employment income remains a necessary and stable foundation. The response, if you are reading the data honestly, is the recognition that employment income alone is insufficient, and that the construction of additional income streams, built alongside employment rather than in place of it, is not a luxury or an aspiration, but a financial necessity. The most effective additional income streams in 2026 share several characteristics. They leverage digital distribution, meaning their reach is not limited by geography or physical presence. They are scalable, meaning they can grow without requiring proportional increases in the creator's time. They generate income that is taxed differently from employment wages. In many jurisdictions, freelance, business, and investment income can be structured to access deductions, deferrals, and preferential rates unavailable to standard employees. And they build assets: audiences, platforms, client relationships, product catalogs, content libraries that have value beyond their immediate income generation. Freelance writing and content strategy, digital product creation, faceless content channels, local lead generation, social media consulting, online coaching, niche e-commerce, AI workflow automation, newsletter publishing, and print-on-demand brands are all models that meet these criteria. Each requires a different combination of skills, time, and initial effort. Each has a different risk profile and a different income ceiling. But all of them share the fundamental property that the employment income model lacks. They can be built incrementally, scaled asymmetrically, and eventually generate returns that are decoupled from the direct exchange of time for money. There is a concept in economics called income diversification, and its importance in personal financial management has been extensively documented. Research from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York found that households with 3 or more income sources demonstrate significantly greater financial resilience, measured by ability to absorb income shocks, maintain savings rates, and avoid high-interest debt, than households dependent on a single income source, even when total household income is held constant. The number of income streams matters independently of the total income level. Diversification provides a buffer against the single point of failure that is the foundation of most families' financial structure. In 2026, building that diversification has never been more structurally accessible. The platforms, tools, and markets required to generate income outside of traditional employment are more capable, more affordable, and more user-friendly than at any previous point in history. The economic pressure to do so has never been more clearly documented. The question is not whether the data supports building additional income streams alongside traditional employment. The data supports it unambiguously. The question is whether the individual, facing real time constraints, real financial pressures, and a very human preference for certainty over risk, is willing to invest the effort required before the necessity becomes acute. History suggests that most people make financial changes reactively rather than proactively. They change when the pressure of not changing becomes more painful than the discomfort of changing. A layoff, a health crisis, a sudden expense that exposes just how thin the margin was. The people who build financial resilience before those moments arrive, who start the side hustle, build the asset, open the additional income channel before they need it rather than after, are not smarter than everyone else. They are simply acting on the same information slightly earlier. The information is available. The tools are accessible. The structural case for diversifying income beyond employment is documented, measurable, and growing stronger every year. What remains is the decision, and decisions, unlike economic structures, belong entirely to the individual. This is Hustle Stack. The data is clear. The next move is yours.